talking about something we shouldn't be talking about. Well, we shouldn't talk about anything. In Zen terms, it's always a defamation, blasphemy to try and talk about anything. Your eyeballs fall out, to use the imagery of the Zen masters. But especially not this, should we talk about it. But since the Manhasset Sangha lost someone by a heart attack suddenly, and since it's the season of death and resurrection in the Christian liturgical year, a celebration of Christ's death and resurrection, Holy Week coming up, and since we had the airplane crash, and just had an explosion down on the Lower East Side, and touching our lives so much, we're going to talk about death. And of course, we talked about it before, and there are all sorts of angles with which you can approach it. But I'd like to approach it from the angle that we've been using the past couple of weeks. Some of you have been following that. You can see them online as well. Of the absolute and the relative. We talked about how teisho, about how Zen really its fundamental insight is that the absolute and the relative are one. That emptiness is form, and form is emptiness, as the Heart Sutra says, or the identity of relative and absolute, as the Zendo says. We've been talking about that. And how various koans emphasize both, but one more than another, just to give you a prismatic, different perspectives on the same reality. So what would, or what does, Zen have to say about death from that point? I mean, absolute and relative. So let's look at that in one way that we can. The absolute. Now we spoke about that first koan of the Mamonkan, Joshu's Mu, which really emphasizes the absolute by denying everything, everything you could say or speak or imagine, or Mu, just Mu. Nothing, no. Even seems to be the wrong answer to the right question, or the right answer to the wrong question. So it's just denial of everything, which is the emptiness, which is the absolute. Well, what about death and emptiness? Mumons, the one who compiled the Mamonkan in the 13th century, when he died in 1260, he wrote a death poem, which very well expresses this. Yes, this. Emptiness is unborn. Emptiness does not die. If you know emptiness, you and emptiness do not differ. So you wake up to the fact that you are emptiness, which is unborn and immortal. So how can you die? If that thou art, if you art that, as the Upanishads say. If you are Christ or the Buddha. So there's that already from the absolute point of view. Now what can we say from the relative? Because what's the mystery of death? Especially if we're talking about death and resurrection. That's not just a Christian idea. We'll see in just a moment. If somehow absolute and relative are one, then somehow everything has to be included in this mystery, whatever it is. So, as you know, I've commented on these before, but now from this point of view, one of the final koans in the Mamonkan is Tosutsu's Three Barriers, which is about death. And I just like to focus on the third one, which is when the four elements decompose, then the traditional esoteric kind of, in cross traditions of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, meaning your body here. When the four elements decompose, where do you go? Well, Maharshi, great yogi of our century, when he was dying, he said, I'm not going anywhere. There's nowhere to go. Which is exactly what some of the Zen masters have said also. Shibayama's commentary mentions a couple of those, again, death poems. It seems the great masters always had time to compose a death poem before they went, probably because they knew it was coming. You're attuned. So anyway, be that as it may, Master Dainin wrote the following farewell poem and serenely died. It says, in coming, I have no abode. Nowhere to lay your head, as Jesus says, no impermanence. In leaving, I have no fixed direction. Where can I go? How is it ultimately? Here I am, all the time. So that's what we try to wake up to, even in this relative, because we're talking about time and space, right? So this is the space part. We're talking about time and space when we talk about the relative, unlike the eternal. Emptiness. So the space part, well, there's nowhere to go because it's always here. And if you wake up to being here, there's nowhere else to be that you could be. So where do you go? The question asks. Well, these masters are saying, where can you go? You're always here. Beautiful phrase here in Shibayama's commentary. The universe is the great cathedral of enlightenment. Each and everything in the universe is nothing else but I, myself. So wherever and whatever anything is, it's you. So what can be left out? And where can you go that you aren't already, if it's all you? So the same with time. It's just only now. It's here and now. Always the now, which becomes the eternal now, which is eternal now. Wumon's poem about this call on this. This one instant is eternity. Eternity is this one instant. If you see into this fact, the true self, which is seeing, has been seen into. Well, various translations of that. In other words, there's no more subject-object, there's no more distinction or separation. It's just now and here. So, it's the eternal now. And where else could you go, and when else could it be? Now, eternal now. And again, beautiful phrase from Shibayama. The true self, as we just said, pervades the universe. Everything is the live manifestation of the truth. At each moment, you are born anew. Sounds like resurrection to me. You died, everything gets in the way, and you were born anew in that eternal now. Sounds like resurrection. So how can you die? Where do you go? When does it happen? You're already the absolute. You're everything in the universe, and it's all right now. What can change? What can die? Eckhart Tolle says very well in his famous book, Power of Now. Death is just the end of an illusion. The illusion of separateness. The illusion that you're not everything. It's the end of that illusion. How wonderful. How liberating. Or as someone else said very well along those same lines, it's the illusory end of an illusory form. This form is emptiness. In today's liturgical reading in the Catholic Church, Jesus says in St. John's Gospel. Whoever keeps my word, keeps me, believes in me, will never see death. And of course they say, what do you mean? Moses died, the prophets said. But that's the same thing Jesus is saying. Or as he says to Martha just before he raises Lazarus, poor Lazarus having to come back to life again in this world, he says, whoever is alive and believes in me will never die. Whatever the illusory end of an illusory form, will never die because you're one with the absolute and with the relative. So if you're already the absolute and already all the relative, where can you go in heaven? What dies? Where can you? It's the liberation of consciousness. We're not a threatened body that somehow has a little soul, perched inside, fearful. It's the whole spiritual world, soul, which contains the body. So that gets us. Well, let's first celebrate. Let's celebrate with Walt Whitman, actually. This famous poem, "When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed," which he composed at the death of Abraham Lincoln. He says, "Come, lovely and soothing death, undulate round the world, serenely arriving in the day, in the night, to all, to each, sooner or later, delicate death. Praised be the fathomless universe for life and joy, for objects, and knowledge curious, and for love, sweet love. But praise for the sure and winding arms of cool, enfolding death. Dark mother, born a new every moment. Dark mother, always gliding near with soft feet, have none chanted for thee a chant of fullest welcome? Then I chant it for thee. I glorify thee above all. I bring thee a song that when thou must indeed come unfalteringly. Laved in the flood of thy bliss, O death, lost in the loving floating ocean of thee, for me to thee glad serenades." You get the point. Not what you usually hear. And this has a real pedigree, not only because it's Walt Whitman and Abraham Lincoln, but this was put to music by Paul Hindemith in the 1940s. Chorus singers at the death of Franklin Roosevelt. So all these insights come together. And of course I should stop talking, but I'm going to. So if you start squirming, this is very esoteric, but it also helps illustrate how some of the traditions have dealt with this integration of this relative into the absolute, which we call in Christianity resurrection. I'm just reporting here things I've discovered. I'm not saying you have to believe it or I believe it or anything. It's very interesting. The yoga tradition, when it speaks about building a bridge of light over lifetimes, and that the more you meditate, the stronger and wider and richer and more luminous your bridge of light from this here to the absolute is. Becomes golden, becomes diamond, becomes radiant. The golden body become completely radiant, like Jesus in the Transfiguration, like Jesus in the Resurrection. And you can speak about a rainbow body, reflecting all the elements of the cosmos. I remember the body of Christ is not just what was a physical body of Jesus of Nazareth, but the whole body of Christ, the whole community, the whole universe, really. How better to explain the universe? It's everything, right? As we just heard. You're already everything. Certainly Christ is, and so are we. But how does that builds up slowly? The more we awaken, according to these traditions. Tibetan tradition, contemporary Tibetan tradition, as testimonies. It wasn't there, but say eyewitness testimonies of masters who, at their physical death, resolved into a rainbow body, actually visible. So when the four elements, to go back to Tosetsu, which in the Tibetan tradition are each associated with a different color, when they decompose, where do you go? Well, there's a rainbow. It's connected to everything. Nowhere to the absolutes. How luminous is that? And in the Judeo-Christian esoteric tradition, they speak about over many lifetimes building up the seed of the resurrection body. It grows, becomes fuller each time. Judeo-Christian esoteric tradition, Hermetic tradition, speaks about that. Building up of the resurrection body. This very famous verse, well, not famous, because nobody dares ever quote it. They don't know what to do with it. Famous verse in the Passion narrative of St. Matthew's Gospel, where when Jesus dies on the cross, the bodies of the saints come out of their graves and go into town and start appearing to people. You never hear that quoted by anybody, because they don't know what the hell to make of it, or they haven't. This tradition interprets it as bodies that have already reached a certain point of evolution. Anyway, all interesting to point out to the fact that as we grow in our enlightenment, how many lifetimes? Try and make it this one. We really are, and become consciously united to the absolute and the relative, everything, in every dimension. It's us. So once again, where can you go and how can you die? What changes? You're just liberated. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? We are risen.